probably at any other time. When you have governance, you have the answers to basically 4 questions. Starting at the top, on the left, you want to make sure that you have some kind of a security infrastructure, which means that you have permission sufficient to dictate who gets access to data and under what circumstances. On the top on the right, you need to take compliance into consideration, which means how is the data used and shared? This can be a discussion about row and column access policies, as an example. On the bottom, we want to talk about trust, which is where did my data come from and where is it going from here? And on the bottom, we want to talk about whether or not our data is high quality, which means do I know its origination and do I know how it got into its present form? Now, if we stop back and think about this for a minute, and we look at these 4 charts, we realize that even though a discussion about data governance is a timely topic, it's also kind of a timeless topic, because these are topics that have been around since the beginning. And I'm sure that you have heard many such discussions about all 4 of these. A discussion about security is a discussion about privileges. A discussion about compliance is row and column access policies, and lineage on the bottom, and data quality on the bottom in the corner. And so when I consistently talk to customers and I find out, why do we have these problems? It's not so much that we don't know that these technologies exist or that we even have them. The issues are, first of all, governing data is nobody's main job. It's something that everybody has to do on the margin. And so I simply do not have the time or inclination to learn dozens of access policies or highly complicated ways of governing data that are unique to one platform or another. Second of all, I have many platforms to deal with, and I simply cannot have a system over here, a system over there, and all of them are different and have different approaches to how to solve the same basic problem. So the issues become, how can we adopt governance in a way that fits into the amount of time and effort I have and will solve the problem across many environments? When we do that, we find that we solve several problems. Because AI is sort of like the small problem that surfaces many larger underlying issues. AI will find every data set in your environment. AI will find where the permission gaps are. So when you're not using governance or it's not effectively employed in your environment, we're going to have the following sorts of issues. Number one, there's going to be a big speed mismatch because AI will pump out millions of queries very, very quickly. And human-oriented systems of providing permission to certain tables or certain data sets and at a rate that is typical for a human process is simply not going to do. Second of all, we're going to have contextual blindness, or what the AI systems call hallucination. I love using Claude. But go home with Claude or Chat, any of your favorite products, and every once in a while ask Claude a question. Why do you think that? Now that's going to change your entire conversation, because in many cases, if I ask Claude, why do you think that? Can you give me a reference for where you got that information? That's going to change its output. And that's what we're talking about here by hallucination. The product has given me an answer that fits the small asterisk at the bottom that says, ChatGPT or Claude can make mistakes, if you call that a mistake. And I'm not saying that this is an incredibly wonderful product. I'm saying that part of the idea of governance is to control what AI does, and the rest of it is about making it effective as possible by guiding it to the appropriate data in my environment under the appropriate circumstances. And then finally over here we may have an accountability gap, and what that means is what did it do, and when did it do it, and how can I know that it conforms to the policies of use that I have in my organization? So what we need to do is make a shift. In the pre-AI era, we had some fairly consistent and okay technologies that are pretty well known. Permissions, context, history. We know how to deal with all that stuff. But we have to sort of put it on steroids in order to get to the post-AI world, which are policies for consistency in an environment in which these tools are making their own decisions at incredibly rapid rates. Dremio's architecture for AI usage was covered very nicely by Tomer, I thought. And so just to kind of give you a refresher here, Dremio has built on the right-hand side at the top an AI agent which is part of a console session. And when you log on, you have it at your disposal to help form queries or to do probative investigations of a variety of types. You can ask it questions. And it takes on the identity of you as the user in that session. Now, one of the things we've not talked about so far is what is the identity of all the agent products? But it's an incredibly important question because its identity is what's going to drive the allocation of privileges and rights that we define for it. And in this case, when it's a member of your console session, it takes your identity. And so it has access to the tables that you have access to. Now on the left, the Dremio MCP server has a variety of other agentic products that are taking advantage of a Dremio feature called OAuth applications that provide OAuth style login for applications that are not inherently designed for OAuth login. And so because we have OAuth libraries in which we assist applications in becoming OAuth applications, you can create OAuth flows for these other products. And when you log in to those other products with your identity, then they can take on your identity again. And so they become you and not someone else, or not globally a variety of identities, which is going to leak information from other identities into your user environment. That would be highly disadvantageous. Now, by ensuring the identity on both sides of this equation, we have governance that we can talk about in three categories. The first, which we touched on earlier today, are data semantics. Dremio is hugely popular with people concerning data semantics, and it's been one of our areas of emphasis for years. The catalog and policy is the Apache Polaris kind of topic that Tomer was talking about a minute ago. And then accountability on the third basically revolves around audit logs and a variety of things like that. So let's talk about each one of these. The workhorse of these three categories is going to be the Dremio Open Catalog, which is our version of the Apache Polaris catalog. Apache Polaris was designed for Iceberg, and the two are meant to go together. Apache Polaris is an open source, fully Apache governed catalog that is currently being supported by a large number of vendors with a large number of developers working on it, and it sits in this architectural diagram right here above your files. There are other things above it. And one of the things that's extremely important to talk about with Polaris is the fact that we have an integrated whole. A customer recently made a comment to me that they thought that the Iceberg story was great and the Apache Polaris story was great, and so they were going to go to the Apache Polaris site and download the Apache Polaris catalog, which you can now do. It's available from the Apache Polaris site in binary form. I've done it. So you can go there, download the Apache Polaris catalog, and I'm going to put it together with Spark, and I'm done. Yeah, okay, that's one way to go about this. But what you're not going to get from that approach is the integration of the whole, which in a million ways is what makes Dremio stand out from pieces, parts solutions, or solutions that you may get from other vendor approaches. Now let me give you a couple of examples. Context is what you get from the integration of the whole. And when you don't have context, you have three fundamental problems. Number one, you get the wrong answer. It's very easy, as we were talking about a minute ago, for the AI agent to come up with an answer that's hallucinated or just incorrect because it has access to many schemas and many data formats. And so if I'm asked for revenue growth, depending on what my financial means of calculation are, I could get two substantially different answers. I may get data that can't connect. I may join my table A with table B, but that was an incorrect join, when I should have joined with table C or another table, or maybe I shouldn't have been using table A at all. And then finally, I get inconsistent metrics. And Sender, I think, used an example very similar to this at the top of the day. We can have a churn rate computed from different sources based on different approaches or definitions of the term that are all substantially different. And what we need in all three of these cases is the context of not only the data, but the use case and the data around it in order to make a comprehensive and correct conclusion, and that's what you achieve through the integration of the whole. Now let me give you an example of what I mean. The integration of the whole on Dremio means that rather than the wrong answer, we deliver a semantic layer that leads the product and the AI agent to compute the correct answer based on available lineage and tag information across your data sets. Rather than data that can't connect, we make available to the AI agents schema and relationship lineage information that will allow them to choose not only what are likely to be the appropriate tables, but to look in query history in order to figure out what tables have been frequently joined with this table in similar queries. And finally, consistency in our metrics, because there's a single source of truth as opposed to several that vary per user or per use case. This leads to phenomenal differences. Now, while we've covered context, let's go on and talk about a slightly different problem, and that is basically what the catalog provides about fine-grained and role-based access. The catalog is the workhorse here because the catalog is what is going to provide the engine for access control. One of the great things about Polaris is that the control of whether or not a user has access to a data set is right there in that catalog. And if you take that catalog and you share it with another project or another situation or another Dremio cluster or somebody else's Dremio cluster, all those privileges which are buried in that catalog go with it to every use case where that catalog is employed. And so you don't have to worry about whether or not this user is going to have access to my table when I share my catalog over here, because all my privileges come with me. What that means is that my identity that I have delegated access to in the catalog remains consistent, regardless of where that catalog is used or the number of connections that are made to it. That row and column isolation policy that I've set up can be applied across the consistency of an engine to any number of catalogs. And so I want to give you a little example of that, because the way Dremio employs that is that Dremio's user identity is based on an OAuth-based identity, which is consistent regardless of where you go, and it's always based on OAuth. The row and column isolation policies are fine-grained and allow you to search at the row level or to mask at the column level. Row-level access is what allows you to separate out one region from another. Let's say you've got a table with a bunch of regions. I don't want to see this region. I only want this user to see those. That's what row access would provide. And column access is where I get my GDPR, PII sort of protection, because I don't want to expose social security numbers or phone numbers or bank balances. And I don't want to go to the trouble of creating a whole other table, because there are folks who are going to need access to that information, but I want to control that. And so there's your basic way of doing so. Now, because I've spoken a lot about Dremio's permissioning policy, I want to say just a bit about why it's unique. We've already spoken in this chat about permission policies. I mean, I could go to a variety of pitches and I could hear a variety of stories about permission policies. And I could easily find a variety of systems that have permissioning policies significantly more complex than this. And that's one of the reasons why Dremio has designed this in the way they have. We've got a handful of privileges here, and the reason why we're able to do a comprehensive job with a small number of privileges is because it's built on the idea of scope. We can take the same privilege and apply it to a table, or to a folder, or to a namespace, or to the catalog itself, depending on how comprehensively we want to delegate privileges and to whom. If I'm very careful about what privileges I want to control and I only want to give read privileges to this table, then I will create privilege only for that table. But what that means is that if I do that a lot, I'm going to be delegating a lot of privileges on a lot of tables. Now maybe that suits me fine because that's the way my system is set up. But if I want to delegate broad sections of privilege without going to that much work, I can create a delegation at a namespace level or at a catalog level. And if I delegate to a role, for example, the privilege on a catalog, I've made one delegation command and I'm done. My entire team or work group has access to the catalog and I'm ready to move on. And so the amount of expressive power you have is very high and the amount of work you have to do could potentially be very small, depending on how you define your use case and what delegation you're trying to control. Now let's say a word about row and column access privilege. I've shown two different kinds of privileges here. Here's a row access policy and here's a column masking policy. Now one of the first things you may notice is that these look starkly like SQL, and that's because they are. Now Tomer mentioned a day in which we won't have any more SQL, and that may be around the corner, and I'm pretty sure that an AI agent could construct these policies. Until that point, we've got SQL expression here for a common kind of filter that I would want to perform on any table or column. In my top expression here, I'm going to create a function that filters by country. And notice that Dremio provides two different ways for me to control access because I can query down to an individual user or to an individual role member. So based on exactly who's performing this query or what role they're in, I can control what rows they see. That's phenomenal. And even though this is SQL and we can get a variety of ways to express SQL and whatnot, the one thing that's great about it is that it's infinitely expressive. I mean, there's nothing I've ever come across that I couldn't express in a SQL function. The same thing is true for column masking here, because in this column masking example, I'm protecting a social security column by putting a variety of stars rather than the actual value for a variety of users. And I can perform that filter according to any user or role member. So I have a tremendous amount of expressive power here. And as far as I know, Dremio is the only vendor that will allow me to express these policies on a table no matter where it comes from. And I have frequently done demos for folks where I take the Snowflake catalog and the Dremio catalog and a Unity catalog and some other stuff, and I integrate it with Dremio and I can filter across all of them with this exact same policy. Wow, that's pretty cool. So we must be done. but we're not done. And that's because there's one major issue with this approach, and that is that the Dremio query engine is what recognizes how to do all this work. So if I happen to be using the Unity query engine or Spark or something else, different answer. That's not going to do. So even though Dremio has been a leader in this technology for years now, Dremio is also driving this technology into Apache Polaris so that from an open source catalog, we will have open source capability for any Iceberg compliant engine to perform essentially the same function across any number of Polaris tables. Well, now we're getting really, really cool because we can take the off-the-shelf Apache Polaris catalog, we can apply filters to it from it that any Iceberg compliant query engine would do, and we'll have this exact same functionality just as powerful as it is today, but in a multi-vendor nature. Look for that early next year because Dremio and a number of other companies are actively engaging to define this technology that starts with Iceberg itself and will be partially implemented in Iceberg as well as in Polaris. Now, our final bullet here about accountability is basically about logs. Dremio has implemented a tremendous number of enhancements to our query logs and audit logs, which you'll see in the next release, which is due next week. You'll see more context than we've ever given before, and an audit log that's much more searchable and breadcrumbs across to define query paths than ever before, so look for that. So let me wrap up here by talking about what we've covered and why Dremio is such a great choice. Dremio is undoubtedly the leader in open technology and its delivery. Ever since Dremio was founded on Arrow almost 10 years ago, Dremio has been the leader in delivering open source technology. And Cinder had a variety of other technologies that we have spearheaded or delivered since then. And now Apache, the catalog Polaris is the latest example of that. And we're driving more technology into that catalog than ever before. Dremio has been proven at scale through many large customers who are processing millions of queries a day, and it's AI ready. We've had a variety of demos and whatnot today that demonstrate that for the integration of Dremio's various pieces parts and making that available to the embedded agents within the platform, you get unbelievable capability for the agent to understand and make the right conclusions.